just start the recording. Fabulous. And we are live. I'm just going to go and check the group. Yeah, I'll do a quick refresh. That is it. Right. Okay. We're on. So welcome to, just a minute early, welcome to this is the 13th mentoring masterclass within the Accelerator workspace. It's building fast now, isn't it? I am joined by the fabulous and ever so slightly wonderful Louise Carrier, who's just slightly amazing in all things graphics and visual identity. And well, rather than me talk about what you're going to talk about, because that would be a bit silly and futile and probably wrong, I'm going to hand this across to you, Louise. What are we going to be looking at this evening on this masterclass?
I'm going to be exploring the Mandalorian theme music deeper. So I'm very interested in the intersection between music and visual identity. And as it was very successful, when I was invited to do a talk a few weeks back, I just thought, is there something we can learn from this? And digging deeper, because it just really piqued my interest, it turned out I think there is.
I just lost you there. Sorry, you just dipped out slightly. So it piqued your interest and?
I thought there was something we could learn from it. And it turned out, on deeper exploration, I think there is. It can serve maybe potentially as a good model for achieving commercial cut through, I think. Because what Goranson did was very interesting with the music, because it wasn't utterly commercial and he did take some big risks, but obviously it has been a great, it's been received very well, hasn't it? Not imagine.
It has indeed,
a job with a lot of pressure.
It's interesting you've gone down this route, actually, which I find fascinating. Just to look at that, the how they've arrived at that kind of differentiation, which of course is really the theme. Excuse me, is really the theme of what you're going to be exploring, which is how to the lessons that you learn, particularly from the music and how the music has come about, what the music is, but also how we learn the principles again. In terms of visual identity, it may not seem to, in right now to a lot of the guys watching, how you're going to bridge across, which is what I'm fascinated to see how you make that shift and the connection between the two. I'm sure it will be amazing. But it's that getting more striking is probably the wrong word, but just that capacity to stand out in a busy marketplace, so that people know it's you. And recognize it's you, but most importantly, I think, and this is the bit I really kind of liked about what we spoke about, is that you're seen in the first place. One of the biggest issues, of course, is you can be brilliant at communication, you can be phenomenal at persuasion, but if nobody sees you, it's kind of a bit of a moot point.
It is.
And particularly if they see you and they don't connect, which is really the big thing, I think. So
definitely,
cool.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've got a couple of people watching us live on the group. I will just quickly nip in. And we've also got some of the guys who are in the Accelerator who've joined us. So we've got Andy, Miranda, Mitali, and Pascal. Hey, guys, lovely to see you. Meredith just jumped in. Awesome. If you guys are staying for the full duration, at the end of this, we'll have a Q&A just for the guys in the Accelerator who are on the Zoom. So I'll be making you the panelists. Be aware that if you do not want to be seen, so like, if you're usually sort of sitting watching this in the buff or whatever is going on, you might not want me to just suddenly switch the video on out of the blue without telling you. So whatever's happening there, just be aware of that and let me know, okay? But at the end, when we announce the Q&A, you'll get a couple of minutes, and then I'll be bringing you on so you can ask Louise any questions that you want. If you don't want to be seen, keep your video turned off and just use the Q&A. On that note, by the way, for those of you that are participating in this as a Zoom webinar, there's a Q&A at the bottom of the screen and the chat. Any observations, any feedback, anything you want to say, just drop it into the chat in the cut and thrust and the flow of Louise's presentation. A specific question that you've got for Louise, drop it into the Q&A and we'll pick it up as we get to the Q&A later on. All right, guys? Awesome. Right. Okay, just a quick one, and before we get into this, Louise, a little bit of background, because I'm fascinated with the skill that you have and the understanding you have, and particularly how you think. But if you don't mind me saying this, you're very, very unassuming. You've got an awful lot of capability, but it isn't immediately obvious, yeah, until somebody sees your work. So how did you arrive at this? What was it that kind of brought you to doing what you do?
Well, when I was younger, I do mention in the talk, originally I trained musically for a long time in my youth. Right. It isn't going to surprise you when I tell you this. The thing that I struggled with was performance, because obviously when you get better, the thing people want you to do is do solos, isn't it? The thing I really didn't want to do. Right. But I was also, I just loved, well, I didn't know everything, but I loved the sciences and I loved arts at school. And we were going through that period when you were forced down one road or another. Mm-hmm. So I was advised to carry on with my music because I was already doing so much outside of it, and to drop art altogether. And I wound up on a chemistry degree at Birmingham. Right. And I didn't like it. And after the first year, I decided to leave. And then I don't know, on a whim, went on a multimedia course, took a typography module. I'd drawn bubble letters and all sorts of things when I was a kid. And I just thought I had no idea there was actually the study of letter forms and you could actually do this for a living. So much to my parents kind of, I don't think they were too keen by this point, but I changed degree again and changed to graphic communication and just never looked back really. I just totally fell in love with it.
Yeah, and I like that term actually, as opposed to, because we all hear the term graphic designer, but not graphic communication. And I think that's a really, really powerful term in terms of conveying what it is that you do, and particularly where visual identity fits into that, which is brilliant. Cool. All right, I am gonna shut the hell up now. I'm just gonna check quickly on the group and just make sure that we have gone live. I think we have. Okay, yeah, we are live in the group as well, which is brilliant. So I'm going to disappear now. If you'd like to share your screen. Okay. Awesome. Right. That's fantastic. I'm going to just disappear now and let you do your thing, and then you will see me at the back end of this. Have fun.
Thank you very much, Dino. Hi, thank you so much to everyone who's taken the time out to join us live this evening. And if you're watching this on the replay as well, thank you so much. What I'd like to discuss tonight, particularly as it's a later evening one, I thought this could be quite fun, I hope, as well, is lessons from the Mandalorian and how to be visually different in a crowded market. So in this talk, I'm going to look at the music from the Mandalorian specifically, and why music can be a useful tool to help you think about visual identity. I'm going to look at what is visual identity and why you should even care as a business owner. Going to think about too what may have contributed to the success of the music from the Mandalorian, as a suggestion for a commercial model of what you can do to stand out, specifically with your visual identity. I'll take a look at some visual examples of identities which are mixing the surprising with the inevitable, and then go on to look at some more examples which show how you can use colour, typography, image, the grid and timing. I should say as well before we start, there aren't any hard and fast rules. As soon as you think you've found a rule, someone will break it brilliantly. So I hope this serves as inspiration and a pointer really. But as I say, Neville Brody always says this, there aren't any rules. So just bear that in mind. So why am I talking about the music from the Mandalorian? Personally, it had my full attention when I first heard it. I didn't really read or watch anything about the show deliberately before I saw the first episode. And from the moment I heard those first tones of the recorder, I was in. It was really as if someone knew what I wanted to hear. It gave expression and meaning to a part of me I felt that had yet to find its voice. It literally felt like Ludwig was playing from my heart. It really touched me. And from that moment on, it had established a relationship with me. from a little internet search, I found out very quickly it has other people's attention too. So I became curious. I thought there's something in this, that the power with which this has struck me, and it's obviously struck other people. This is interesting, so I wanted to know more. I've yet to meet somebody who doesn't like music. So this is something we all have experience of, as opposed to maybe visual identity. So I think as well, this is interesting because it's easier perhaps to look for the patterns in music than it is in visual identity if it's something you're unfamiliar with. I was invited to give another talk, as I said to Dino, and this felt it worth exploring. One of the reasons was it's my area of interest, and you may or may not know this, but I've been very interested in the intersection of the branches of knowledge, in this idea of consilience since I first encountered Edward O. Wilson's work. I studied music for much of my youth, and looked at maths and beauty on my BA, so that was my interest in art and science. And then I started to explore design as a translation as a design tool on my MA, translating the Serpentine Gallery into sound using simple maths. And I also looked at the intersection of architecture, music and typography, looking at the work of Daniel Libeskind, Aaron Schoenberg and Stefan Milane. These elements really are fundamentally the same. Interestingly, we even use the same terminology when we discuss music and when as designers we'll discuss graphics and visual identity. So rhythm, you may talk about rhythm in a piece of music, or we'll talk about the rhythm in type. Essentially, it just boils down to a pattern in time, and the function of that in both disciplines is really quite similar in that it serves to hold things together. You may also hear people speak about tone. They may speak about tone in the copy even, or the overall tone of a piece of visual design. And of course, people will talk about the tone of an instrument or the tone of a piece. And tone, when taken as a general concept, can be seen as the product of all influences on what can be heard, seen and read. You may also hear people talk about texture. So texture in a piece of design, texture from the type, texture within illustrations, and also texture within a piece of music. And this really, as a broad definition, is just how elements combine together. Are they sparse? Are they layered? And of course, you'll hear people talk about the hook. So the idea, that phrase used to catch attention, maybe it's like the chorus in a song that you just can't get out of your head. It's a brilliant piece of copy on a poster, or it's a visual device that you can't take your eye off. One thing those things all share in common is it's a very memorable passage, and that I think is really key. And going back to my first statement, if you think about this, this was just what I kind of said when I was writing about it off the top of my head. It had my full attention as soon as I heard it, I was in. It gave expression and meaning to a part of me, and that established a relationship. Isn't that what we're seeking to achieve with our customers as business owners and with our visual identity and branding? So what is visual identity? Simply, it is just the graphic components of a brand identity. So I know a few people have asked me this, and it's a very, very good question. Why should you care? If you're a business owner, why should you care about visual identity? First of all, it can help you get the attention of your customers. And please don't take my word for it. Gary Vee is famous for saying this, isn't he? He believes that attention is the singular important asset for anybody trying to achieve anything, to create anything. It can actually help encourage people to trial things. One of the general managers in innovation at Diageo has actually said that while they do spend billions of pounds on advertising their products, the best place to catch the attention of their shopper is right at the initial stage. And what is it that's actually doing that? It's the bottle design and the label design. which is parts of the product's visual ID. It can also be memorable in its best case, and it can encourage repeat purchase, and it can encourage people to remember you and to look for you. This was proved really nicely in 2009 when Tropicana decided to remove their very famous orange with a straw on it from their packaging. This resulted in a 19% drop in market share for the brand, and it took them just 1 month to go to the costly exercise of reinstating all the old packaging design. The effect was so dramatic. But what about your business? Marty Neumeier has famously said your brand isn't what you say it is, it's what they say it is. But as Donna Brown, who you may know from this group, brilliantly asked, what if it doesn't exist yet? Or, so what do you do if you're starting out as Ludwig Göransson was with the music? Or what could you do if what you have isn't working? What, if anything, can we learn from Göransson's success? So thinking about it, why might the music have worked so well? So let's take it apart and look at what we have. We have very novel elements. As soon as the main theme comes in, and I'll pop the link in the group if you've not heard that, you hear this really sort of a low instrument calling out, and it turns out it's a bass recorder. And I'd suggest, I don't know, but can you imagine walking into a Disney exec's office and saying, I know just the thing we need for the Mandalorian, for the soundtrack, just to make it, we need a recorder. I think he'd have had a hard sell there, but it's a brilliant choice. As that builds, you get very specialist samples. I know he's got specific equipment to use to generate those. So you've got a very sparse texture at first with just those two elements, and it's very unusual, so it captures your attention. This builds into a compelling hook. He uses a lot of minor and major, so you've got tension and resolution, and that, because of how it works for you, it starts to tell a story. You have a variety of tone. You have different instrumental tones and a wind instrument contrasted with samples. For example, you've got strings and brass, this very simple opening contrasted with lush orchestration. I needed to put my teeth in tonight. You've got rhythm, which is really driving, really cool drums, which keeps the momentum and it keeps everything together. You've also got some very familiar elements. So you have this very simple melody called out alone. Maybe it's calling to the others, which for me really references bugle calls as well. And as a lot of people have said, it of course references Ennio Morricone's famous music for the good, the bad and the ugly. So immediately you're in the right place for a space western. So you've got that western reference, which is really clever. You've also got the fact that he does beautifully bring the orchestra in some way into this theme. And I think the sound that he's got, it's not a rip-off, it isn't derivative, it just beautifully nods to John Williams, who did the music for Star Wars. So again, there you've got something that the fans who are familiar with that would know and would love as well. So I think that was very, very powerful. So could this be a useful model for commercial differentiation? I would suggest what allowed Ludwig to take these risks, to stand out, to differentiate, to use a very unusual instrument and to go in really, really sparse, but without totally committing commercial suicide, was how he brilliantly combined all these elements, and particularly these very novel elements with the familiar elements with some things the audience knew. And that, I would suggest, is of real interest and value to us as business owners. David Mamet said, the hallmarks of innovation are surprise and inevitability. So I think that really is what you're saying here. And I've got to give massive thanks to Donna for sending me this quote, because I think it really helped me nail what I'm talking about here. So as you look at the examples I'm about to show you, I'd encourage you also to think about music and to think about the similarities between the two areas. I'd say observing patterns in music and deconstructing it is perhaps a little easier because you can't encounter a piece of music all at once in the way that you might gaze on a design at once, that the piece of music builds over time. So in that way, it's perhaps a little easier sometimes to tease out the individual elements and to feel what you're feeling at different points and to tease out why it might be working. Whereas good designers seek to establish a clear visual hierarchy, and all these examples do work with hierarchy, as I say, it can take a little time to get your eye in if you're unfamiliar. So I would really encourage you, to think musically as well as visually. These examples are all brilliantly mixing the surprising with the inevitable, I would suggest. If you're familiar with the font Cooper, it may immediately make you think of the 60s. This is shown here in the, oh dear, never touch a trackpad while you give it a talk, sorry. This is shown here in the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds vinyl, and also James Brown's letter in there. It was also used, quite famously on nightclub flyers and all kinds of ephemera from that era. So I'd suggest it wouldn't be the first choice for a technology company, particularly when they were looking to elevate their brand. But that's exactly what MailChimp did. They used a lighter weight, as you'll see here, in the crafting MailChimp's new design. They paired this with a very elegant sans serif, and they also introduced this very, very arresting colour palette, this brilliant orange. It's almost sort of an acidic orange, isn't it? And these lovely inky blacks and this freestyle sort of line drawn style of illustration, which again, both things I would say were quite risky, and I think it did cause a lot of buzz at the time when it came out. You'll see here they've used it quite sparingly though, just in the headlines. The main body copy is in this sans serif and the illustrations are very well judged in the space. So again, I think you've also got kind of quite a regular web layout going on here. So although they are introducing some very novel things, they're kind of working with them in a framework that helps to bed them in the same way that Ludwig Göransson also brought the orchestra in, which helped that piece of music kind of not disappoint the fans, really, I guess. And here there's nothing, it's not too strange, but it is a very unusual choice of typeface, I think, for a tech company, but I think they've managed it very, very well indeed. Magazines are very, very well known for having quite a certain visual vernacular. Obviously, they're really concerned with getting eyeballs. If they can't make you look at the cover, and they can't make you want to pick it up, then they're not going to sell, are they? So magazine cover design is quite a pressured, and it's got very well honed, I would say. Chris Doe, who some of you may know, I think very brilliantly took the aesthetics of magazine cover design and kind of a very editorial style, and started applying that to his Instagram carousel design. He uses a very nice font. It's a Flair Jones font. It's Gotham. He's got a very strong grid underneath all of these. Good sort of relationships of scale between the text. And I'd say quite an editorial use of image as well, and an editorial use of space. And you'll see it isn't the only thing, but I think it is one of the reasons his account has exploded. He's a very good teacher, and certainly his design is doing nothing to detract from his message. It's really enhancing it beautifully. If you think of gold foiling in packaging and very, very decadent boxes, you might perhaps think of very exclusive chocolates like these Fortnum and Mason ones shown here, or very, very fine teas. I would suggest you probably wouldn't think of tinned tomatoes. But this is some of the limited edition packaging that Augé did for Mutti. And these are some of their tinned tomatoes here. This has won lots and lots of awards. I would say, I mean, you couldn't help but buy that really. I would have to buy one on the shelf just to see what it was like. And I don't think really you could do more to set your customer up to enjoy the experience to its maximum. It's like, even now thinking about it, I really want to know if these tomatoes taste as good as they look. So now let's look at some of the more well-known visual ingredients that make up visual identities and create tone and texture. So the first one I'd like to look at is colour. Again, this is from Auger's design for F. Mutti. And this is brilliant because they've got quite a restricted colour palette here. And what they've done is they've actually thought, a lot of tomato purees in cans will show illustrations, won't they, or photography. So they've kind of reduced the tomato to the most abstract form, and each of these shapes is used on each of the different tomato products. They've got this really, really nice red. I think it's a lovely shade. It's not too pink. It is very tomato red. And they've carried this through beautifully throughout the range. So it's very, very identifiable. Because they've used the different shapes as well, although it's repeating, it doesn't become boring. And I think that's a really key point too. You'll see here as it's applied through the range. So depending on the type of tomato, there's a different shape. It's beautifully, they've left the bottle clear, so the product itself is creating that red, and you'll see how well they've matched it really, the colour of the tomato product to the colour that they're using. And then they've got this different shape as well, which they're using on the puree. They've let the metallic colour of the can come through. Again, they've used a different kind of can colour, certainly to the one we're used to seeing in the UK, as ours are more often silver, and our tomato purees are more often silver without this kind of gold on. So again, that's quite unusual, and it's very, very special, and it's all aiding to elevate this into something, you know, a little bit more special, isn't it? Fortnum and Mason. If you're familiar with Fortnum and Mason, I would suggest it probably wouldn't be long were I to say that to you, that you'd start thinking about this lovely turquoise colour. You can see there on some of their famous teas, their Royal Blend tea packaging. It's also carried through in this illustration, which is in one of their online catalogues. You can see it's taken into the background where they're showing off their salmon. It's within some of the props in their photography. They've even popped it in some of the buttons on the website. So they're taking real great care with this, and it's all these little pops of that colour that serve to further reinforce that, you know, and to cement it in your mind as being Fortnum's turquoise. And I think that attention to detail as well is also really, really cool. You know, how they've bothered to match the background up and using it on the buttons and on the little props and things like that. It's lovely. This is a piece of Pentagram's work for the Atlantic Theatre Company. You'll see they created quite a distinctive design where they filled in the A's in the word Atlantic. It's quite a condensed font. And then the brochure there was contained within this polythene slipcase, which was screened with this red colour, which is the main colour I would suggest in this branding. You'll see as that opens out, although it reappears, it doesn't reappear, I'd say, too much. It's just enough. There's also other colourways brought in, but again, this very, very strong typographic style, it lets you know that you're within the same booklet, and they've got a very distinctive use of space here in the grid, and they've even nicely picked up upon that A in the shapes that they've enclosed the photographs in. You see when it's pulled out, that's really nice, isn't it? It's a really nice dynamic arrangement. Again, you see the red popping up and that very familiar shape, but again, it's used at lots of different scales and it's placed very nicely, sort of leading your eye around to give a really nice effect. That's the inner opened out. And again, they've used this nice A shape, and again, you'll see that pop of red. serving to further reinforce that in your mind as being it's the main brand colour and also this very distinctive stylised A. So let's have a look at typography. Going back to some of Christo's work, as I mentioned, he does use Gotham quite a lot in his headlines. I know he gets a lot of questions about what font he's using. And again, here you can see, even though he's using it at different sizes and different scales, and he varies his placement more than this, but you can see there is some variety there. It's got a certain look, and I think that font is very distinctive, and I think that's really helping him to keep that. And I think, you know, when you're scrolling through your feed, I can certainly spot a Christo post, and this use of this font, this very distinctive use, is one of the key factors, I think, there. The London Design Festival is very well known for this distinctive red and white. And this year they went purely typographic with this lovely stylised fat font. And you can see the poster there. This was developed then across tote bags and also pull-outs, and you can see it used in the spread here on this bottom right. Quite generously as well, I'd say that's another thing. There's lots of different scales going on here, and also they've not been afraid to use some letters really, really large and some type really, really small. So again, that's creating a nice contrast. In a similar way, for example, in the music, that you've got the recorder contrasted with the electronic samples, or you've got the recorder and the orchestra, or the quiet and the louder parts. Contrast is a really, really powerful thing. And that's one thing I notice. Sometimes people, they don't go far enough. I think this is a good example of where they've really pushed this. And the contrast and the level of interest that this work has as a result of it, I think, is much greater. This is carried on through the notebooks, and again, they've also popped some variation in here, which is nice. So, you know, if this really appealed to you, you might even buy all three, so you had 3 different covers. MailChimp as well, as I said before, they picked up with this lighter weight of Cooper, contrasted with this sans serif font. And I think Cooper as a font is, again, similarly to Gotham, is very distinctive, really. I think once you were educated a little bit that this was the MailChimp font, it would be very easily identifiable as such. They've worked with it really well, as I say, not using it, they've not used too much of it. And I think they've given it lots of space as well and lots of room to breathe, because it's a little bit curvaceous, isn't it? And I think that really helps set it off nicely. Again, it's good contrast. The very, very freestyle line illustrations as well serve to sort of contrast again there. Another nice touch I noticed, they've even bothered to put it in the menu. And that's something that you don't always see brands do that. So there's real attention to detail in this site. They've gone through to the, you know, the really finer points of design here, which again is all helping to kind of teach you. It's a rebrand, and it's a new look for them. So I think that's really good how they've done that. Let's take a little look at image. I couldn't believe this when I found it. It's for a company called Omega Yeast, and they actually sell yeasts for people who want to make their own brew at home, which I thought was fascinating. And they've only actually really got one actual true colour, this sort of kind of duck eggy blue colour in their colour palette, and then the rest is black and white and grayscale. The textures you can see are all coming from the different types of yeast, which when they're fermenting, create different bubble patterns on the surface. The designers really use these nicely, and I think they've also maximised their use as well, because they've used them as duotones, monotones, and also put them behind the main brand shape there, which again, it stops it becoming repetitive, but it is easily identifiable. It's a lovely job, this, as you'll see. They've even applied it into their facility there. They've placed it around the window. They have some on the building outside. They've even branded the outside of their facility. If you go through the website, the image in the top right here, it actually animates which again, I thought that was a lovely touch. And again, you're seeing it in this sort of monotone blue colour, which is quite unusual. When you start to explore their product range, each of their products has got a little circular image again. And again, this pattern is being created by the yeast itself that they're selling. And this is some of their packaging. This has had quite a few mentions as well, because although we are starting to see more foodstuffs packaged in these little pouches, I think the style of illustration and the colours and everything, they're quite novel, and they would catch your eye. And I think for me, if I were in the market for some yeast to make some homebrew with and I could get theirs, I'd be in no doubt I would definitely try it, because I feel like if they've taken that much care over everything they're doing, it's like, if you have a look at the website after this, it's lovely. The company has done this, they've done such a beautiful job of it. It really is a lovely thing, you know. It does make me feel that company really, really cares. Pucker Tea, I think they may be having a slight reworking, but this was the visual idea. I think it was done by Space Creative. And at the time when these came out, there wasn't so much brightly coloured packaging. I know now when you go in the supermarket, there's the chocolate section and the tea section. You know, if you're feeling a little bit down, you can cheer yourself up by going in there, because it's just such a smorgasbord of amazing colour combinations. But when Pucker first launched, things were a little bit more staid. So this really, really stood out perhaps a lot more than it does today. But again, their product is good. I mean, you can't really do anything about that as a designer. So you've got to have that to back up what you're doing. But again, as soon as I saw these, I did pick some up to try it, because it's just so beautiful to see such care taken over some tea packaging. It was just wonderfully seductive with all these lovely colours. And I thought, wow, I wonder what that's going to taste like. Will it taste as nice as it looks? And it does. You'll see this style of illustration is carried on through their advertising as well. It's very, very distinctive. As I say, they're very brave with their use of colour. They don't hold back. You know, it's very, very lush, isn't it? And organic and ornamental. So again, it's very, very distinctive, and it ties beautifully to the organic little twirls that come off the K in the logo. The New Yorker is also obviously really famous for its covers and its illustrations, so I couldn't really talk about image without at least mentioning that. And they've got a few different styles that they run with, which, even though there's different styles, there is a New Yorker look if you start looking at lots of them. So someone's keeping a very good eye on that. But this is one of the styles they tend to run with, which is very reduced colours, very simple lines, very graphic. You know, very, very arresting and very distinctively the New Yorker because of that. As part of MailChimp's new look, they brought in these lovely, very freestyle, black and white hand-drawn illustrations as well, which again, I thought at the time was quite a brave choice really for a tech company, especially when everything, I think they were going through that kind of flat design trend and everything was quite precise. You know, and MailChimp came out with this, which was very different. I also like as well where they're giving some attention to placement. You can see the ink just under this person's boot is just bleeding out a little bit outside of the shape, like it's coming out the screen at you, and I thought that was really nice. It's a little bit playful. Even when they're used on these more muted pastel tones, you can see they do draw your eye. I think as well that they use black quite dominantly, and that kind of leads to the, you know, to their eye-catching value. But again, it's quite different, especially when a lot of tech companies were using the flat design trend, or they were using icons and things like that. It's nice to see that human touch. I can't really talk about ways you might be able to stand out without mentioning grids, because they're just such a powerful tool. As I've said, Chris Doe uses these. I don't know whether I've got this right. I know he's gridded his margins off like this, but you can see here the type is pretty much sitting on the third baseline on the left. And then the thrust of that lad's eyes and that shape, even though they're closed, is perfectly going along the halfway point on his slide. So I know he'll be in control of this because he does very, very elegant designs which are beautiful. Similarly, the one on the right, the middle of the text is going through the third line, so there's a bit of thrust there because it's picked out in black. And a lot of these proportions we're quite drawn to. Often you'll find yourself placing something on a page and I'll like just drop it on the bottom third by accident and I won't have measured it. So I think that we are really aware of proportion and of space, even though we might not be aware that we're, doing any kind of thinking about it. So again, a grid is another way where you can retain some consistency and also use some of these things. And it does help to give people, what would you say? It stops people kind of feeling nervous. It kind of lets them know where they are in much the same way that a rhythm will work. It sort of keeps things in order a little bit. Again, there's a really strong grid going under the Omega Yeast website as well. They've obviously used a lot more space here and they've got these really nice kind of vertical pieces of type as well. Of course, though, you can totally break it, or you can start to play with space. So this layout on the left is just dominated by this blackout text, isn't it? It's very, very full and very arresting because of it, and it's giving a very different emotion to those two examples that we looked at previously. Whereas the layout on the right is well, it's more akin to like a cacophony, isn't it, or some free-form jazz. It's like really, really dynamic. And that there is some order underneath this, but it's literally exploding out of the page. So I wanted to include these, as obviously, as I said, that there are rules, but there are beautiful examples where people break these and they break them very well. Lastly, I thought it would be nice to have a little word about timing, particularly because it may not be something you necessarily associate with static imagery or static graphics straight away. But it is there. And I couldn't say anything about that without saying a little about comic timing. So these are two pieces by Christoph Niemann. He also does a lot of work for The New Yorker. I'm a massive fan of his work, but both they're simple, but they're brilliant and just very, very witty. So there's that little pause and then it lands. It's like, oh, yeah, it's a cellist. I never thought of that before. It's a, kind of a coat hanger, and it sort of evolves in you, doesn't it, over a few seconds. So it does take time for the emotion of this to land. Also, there are layouts like this Chaplin one that give you a, oh yeah, and there's a little pause, isn't there? And then you might go and read it. So that again is all happening through time. This example on the right is a David Carson rework of a Little White Lies cover. And you'll see here he's really using layers, which he became very well known for that. And also his challenge of legibility, with Reagan and that, he used a lot of like really kind of layered and distressed type that you'd really have to kind of want to read it. It wasn't laid out sort of sans serif, all nice and clean. So that's interesting. Again, this is a piece that you could maybe look at for a good few seconds and you find new things in it, and maybe the lady's face becomes clearer, the type seems to go away, and then sometimes you pulled more back into the type. So that's interesting too, because again, it's holding your interest over a period of time. Again, going back to Fortnum and Mason, is this lovely concept, as it was taught to me anyway by Jessica and Carolyn when I was being trained, of like the design surprise. So people, when they buy this box of chocolates, are rewarded with this beautiful shot of orange inside. So that's interesting again, because again, it doesn't happen immediately. It's not revealed immediately. So that's another way you can create, a longer and a further experience for your customers. It also shows that little bit of extra care, which I think is quite nice. Again, from Pucker, if you've ever bought any of their tea, you'll see they always have a lovely black and white print inside. And again, when often packaging the inside would be plain, that's a really nice touch too, because often I've opened these out and I've had a little look. And these things as well, they needn't cost like loads of money. They've used one colour inside here. That'll make it a lot cheaper, as opposed to the amount they'd have spent printing the front. So that's a nice little touch and another little surprise. I had to show Mutti's Augie's design for Mutti again once more, because that is lovely. And one of the really, really cool things is if you've got lots of them, the pattern meets up with itself. So you get another experience when you view all of these together. So again, that's something nice you can do if you have multiple things, is to think about, well, they look a certain way alone, but how do they look when they're together? As the designers thought about when they created these posters for the St Etienne Opera House. You'll see often sometimes on a board, you'll get more than one poster shown. And these are really lovely because these large O's, when they're put together, some of them start to meet and that starts to create a pattern. And again, I think that really would draw your eye in if you were to see that. Another bit of timing, I guess you could use as well, is to give control over to the customer. So I know Oreo have launched Oreo ID. I'm guessing very inspired by Nike ID. So there you have this idea that you can give some of the control of the design to the customer, and then they would have that period where they would be waiting to receive these in the post. And I think if I'd ordered a box of custom coloured Oreos, I'd be quite excited to see what they were going to turn out like. So again, that's another example. It's a longer experience, and it's of a design using timing, and it's evolving a little bit more like a piece of music might. Oh, I've just made my time. So thank you very, very much for listening. I'll return the floor to Dee now. And if you have any questions or feedback or observations from this, I'd love to hear them.
Louise, that was brilliant. I was enthralled. Once, particularly as we started bridging across into some of the examples that you were sharing, some staggering bits of visual identity there. Let me just ask you, I don't know if you've done this on the slide, but have you got a way that the guys, other than just tagging you in the group, a way that the guys can connect with you?
Yeah, sure. You can. You're very welcome to email me. You can go to my website, and you can of course get in touch with me in the group or in the accelerator, Dino. Yeah. Okay,
cool. That's fine, guys. I'm just going to leave that on screen for a little bit, just so you can pick up any of this if you're watching this on the replay in particular. But in either the accelerator workspace or SU, and SU is really the place to do it. Just tag Louise if you've got any questions about this, particularly if you're picking this up the 24 hours that this is live in the SU group. That's brilliant. What we're going to do is flip across to a Q&A now. So for those of you, I'm going to cut the live stream. For those of you that are on the session, I'm going to be bringing you on as panelists, which means basically just a normal Zoom call. We'll flip across through, so you can ask Louise any questions, or just hang about if you want to just hear the questions that other people ask and the answers that Louise give. So like I said right at the start of this, if you don't want to get caught short on video, make sure your video is turned off, because you're going to be coming on as a standard Zoom session right now. Right, so let me just cut the stream.